He took the window seat because it was easier with a child. Less movement, fewer looks. The man beside him arrived late, calm in a way that suggested he was used to being waited on. They nodded once. That was it. At 30,000 feet something shifted. Not turbulence, not weather. A quiet change in the cabin that made the father sit up straighter and pull his daughter closer without knowing why. The man beside him noticed. He always noticed things before others did. There would be a moment later, brief, public, impossible to take back, when the father would have to choose how much of himself he was willing to lose in front of strangers. The choice would not feel heroic. It would feel small. But it would follow him long after the plane landed, long after the billionaire forgot his name. Nothing on that flight would return to how it was. If you value slow, grounded stories like this, a quiet subscribe helps more than it seems. He boarded early because he always did. Not because he enjoyed it, but because it reduced variables. Fewer people in the aisle meant fewer apologies, fewer hands reaching over his daughter's head, fewer chances for something to spill or break or turn into a problem he'd have to solve mid-air. He kept one hand on her shoulder as they walked. Not tight, just present. She dragged her shoes a little, the rubber catching against the thin carpet. He didn't correct her. There were limits to how much attention he could spend before the flight even began. Their seats were halfway down the cabin, right side, window and middle. He stowed the backpack overhead himself, lifting it carefully so it didn't brush anyone's coat. Inside were snacks measured to last exactly as long as the flight, a paperback he hadn't opened in months, and a folded change of clothes in case something went wrong. Things usually did. He sat first so she wouldn't have to climb over anyone. She slid in beside the window and pressed her forehead lightly against the glass, watching the shapes outside move slowly, deliberately. Ground crews, carts. Nothing that belonged to her, but everything interesting. He buckled her seatbelt before his own. He always did that too. The seat beside him remained empty longer than most. People passed it, glanced at the row number, then moved on. He noticed the extra space without leaning into it. Experience had taught him not to expect comfort to last. When the man finally arrived, it was with no rush. He paused at the row, checked his ticket once, and sat down without asking either of them to move. He smelled faintly of something clean and expensive, not sharp, just controlled. He placed a slim leather bag under the seat in front of him and rested his hands on his knees while the plane continued to fill. They exchanged a brief nod. Nothing more. The father registered the details without labeling them. The cut of the jacket, the watch worn loose, as if time bent around its owner instead of the other way around. The way a flight attendant slowed slightly as she passed, then returned a moment later to ask if everything was all right. Yes, the man said. Thank you. The answer closed the conversation. The father looked straight ahead. He felt his shoulders settle into the narrow space allotted to him. He adjusted his elbows so it wouldn't touch the armrest too aggressively. He had learned how to make himself smaller in public without thinking about it. It was muscle memory now. His daughter turned her head, studying the man beside her father with open curiosity. She didn't stare long, just long enough to register that he was different in a way she couldn't yet name. Then she went back to the window. As the last passengers boarded, the overhead bins filled unevenly. Someone struggled with a suitcase 2 rows up. The father half rose from his seat before catching himself. He sat back down. He didn't need to help everyone. The plane pushed back from the gate. The familiar hum began to build. He felt it in his chest first, then in the floor beneath his feet. Dad, his daughter said quietly, are we flying over the river? Later, he said, after we're higher. She nodded, satisfied. The man beside him took out his phone and glanced at it once before turning it face down on his thigh. He didn't scroll. He didn't type. He just acknowledged it, then put it away. The movement was efficient, practiced. The father wondered briefly what kind of work allowed for that kind of calm. Then he stopped himself. Other people's lives were not puzzles meant for him. The safety demonstration began. He had seen it enough times to recite it without looking, but he watched anyway. He always watched. He believed in paying attention to exits. When the oxygen masks were mentioned, his daughter reached for his sleeve without looking at him. He covered her hand with his own. She relaxed. The man beside them watched the demonstration too, not politely. Precisely. As the plane taxied toward the runway, the father felt the old tightening in his stomach. Not fear. Responsibility. If something went wrong, there would be no margin for hesitation. He reviewed the steps without emotion. The engines roared. The plane accelerated. His daughter pressed back into her seat, eyes wide but calm. Beside him, the man did not move. They lifted cleanly. The ground fell away in measured increments. Buildings became patterns. Cars became lines. The father exhaled only after the wheels left the ground. He didn't know it yet, but this was the last moment on the flight where his attention belonged only to what was in front of him. Everything after would require him to choose where to stand, even while sitting still. The seatbelt sign stayed on longer than usual. The father noticed. The seatbelt sign clicked off with a soft chime that barely cut through the engine noise. People shifted. Trays came down. A few conversations started and stopped as if testing the air. The father waited. He always did. He let the cabin settle before moving. When he finally unbuckled, it was to reach into the backpack at his feet, pulling it toward him carefully so it didn't brush the man beside him. He unzipped it just enough to slide out a small packet of crackers and a folded napkin. He handed the crackers to his daughter without comment. "Thank you," she said, quiet but clear. She ate slowly, counting bites the way he'd taught her. Not because food was scarce, but because time was. Stretching one thing into many had become a shared habit. He took out his phone next. The screen was cracked at the corner. The glass splintered like it had frozen mid-break. He checked the time. No messages. That was normal. He slipped it back into his pocket. Across the aisle, someone laughed too loudly at something on a screen. 2 rows ahead, a man leaned his seat back without checking behind him. The father adjusted his knees. He didn't say anything. The man beside him pulled a thin folder from his bag and opened it, just enough to read a page. There were no logos visible. No markings that meant anything to the father. The man's eyes moved steadily, not fast, not slow. When he reached the bottom, he closed the folder and put it away. A flight attendant stopped again, this time offering drinks. Her tone shifted slightly when she reached their row. "Water?" she asked the man. "Yes," he said. She turned to the father. "And for you?" "Water's fine." She glanced at the daughter. "Apple juice," the girl said before her father could answer. The attendant smiled at her, genuinely, and handed over the small cup with care. When she left, the father placed the napkin under the cup without being asked. He had learned how spills turned into apologies, and how apologies sometimes turned into looks. His daughter took a sip and made a small face. "It's warm," she said. He nodded. "Still okay." She nodded back and kept drinking. He watched her while she did. Her hair fell into her eyes. She didn't brush it away right away. She was thinking about something else. "Dad," she said, still looking at the cup. "Why do some people get talked to different?" He didn't answer immediately. He took his own cup, held it, then set it down unopened. "Different how?" "Like?" She paused, searching for words. "Like the lady keeps coming back to him." She didn't point. She didn't need to. He followed her gaze anyway, just enough to confirm what he already knew. The man sat still, hands folded now, eyes closed as if resting. "Some people ask for things more," the father said. "Some people get asked." She considered that. Why? He could have said money. He could have said work. He could have said luck. None of those felt complete. "Because that's how it is," he said finally. She frowned slightly, not upset, just unconvinced. "That doesn't sound finished," she said. He almost smiled. Almost. He leaned back in his seat and looked forward again. The cabin lights dimmed a fraction. Outside the window, clouds slid past, dense and gray, layered like stacked fabric. The father's thoughts stayed close to the surface. He thought about the apartment they'd left that morning, the light in the kitchen that flickered if he didn't turn it on just right, the note he'd left on the counter for the neighbor who would water the plant while they were gone. He thought about the meeting he'd taken time off for, the one waiting at the other end of the flight. Not an interview. Not an opportunity. Just maintenance. Keeping things where they were. Stability required constant attention. Letting go for even a moment meant catching up later. The man beside him shifted slightly, crossing one leg over the other. The movement was smooth, unhurried. His phone vibrated once against his thigh. He looked at it this time longer than before, then typed a short response and put it away again. The father noticed how quickly the tension left the man's shoulders afterward, as if something had been resolved without effort. He felt a brief, sharp awareness of contrast. Not jealousy, not anger, just the clean recognition of distance. His daughter finished her juice and handed him the empty cup. He folded the napkin over it and set it on the tray. "Can I draw?" she asked. He reached back into the bag and pulled out a small notebook and a pencil, the eraser worn down to almost nothing. He handed them to her. She pressed the notebook against her knees and began to draw, her tongue tucked slightly between her teeth. He didn't ask what it was. He learned that questions sometimes interrupted things that needed to finish on their own. The plane hummed steadily. People settled into the rhythm of the flight. The father rested his hands on his thighs and let himself sit with what was around him. He did not know yet how narrow that space would soon feel. The man beside him opened his eyes and stared straight ahead, as if waiting for something he had already scheduled. The first sign was not obvious. It came in the way the aisle cleared when the man stood up to let a flight attendant pass. People shifted without being asked. A knee moved in. A shoulder turned. Space rearranged itself around him, then returned to normal once he sat back down. The father noticed because he always noticed how space worked. On buses, in waiting rooms, in grocery store lines. He had learned where to stand so others would not feel crowded, and where not to stand so he would not be ignored. Space was a language. He spoke it fluently. The man beside him spoke a different dialect. It showed again when a flight attendant leaned down and spoke quietly, too softly for the father to hear. The man nodded once. No smile. No thanks this time. She straightened and moved on, her pace quickening as if relieved. The father did not look at her face. He watched her shoes instead, how they changed direction without pause. His daughter kept drawing. The pencil scratched softly against the paper. She was careful not to let it roll off the tray table. When it did slip, she caught it before it hit the floor, glancing up at her father as if checking whether she'd done something wrong. He shook his head slightly. She relaxed and went back to the page. The plane hit a small pocket of uneven air. Not enough to jolt, just enough to remind everyone where they were. A few drinks rattled. Someone laughed nervously. The man beside him did not react. He reached up and adjusted the air vent above his head, turning it a fraction to the left. The movement was precise, as if he already knew exactly how much air he wanted. The father felt his own vent blow cold against his temple. He left it alone. A few minutes later, a drink spilled 2 rows back. The sound of liquid hitting fabric carried forward. A child cried. A parent apologized too many times. The father tensed automatically, his body preparing to assist. He shifted forward in his seat before stopping himself again. The flight attendant handled it. Paper towels. Reassurance. It was resolved quickly. Still, the moment lingered. The father glanced at the man beside him, expecting irritation. There was none. The man watched the cleanup with mild interest, like someone observing a process he trusted would work. "You travel often?" the father asked, before he had time to reconsider. The question surprised even him. He did not usually initiate conversation, especially not with people who carried themselves like that. The man turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge the sound. "Yes," he said. That was all. The father nodded once, as if a longer answer had been given. He did not follow up. He felt the familiar pull to retreat, to return to quiet observation, where he was most comfortable. A few moments passed. "And you?" the man asked. The father hesitated. The question did not feel polite. It felt procedural. "Sometimes," he said. The man accepted that answer too. He looked forward again. The exchange left the father more aware than before, not of the man's wealth, but of the ease with which conversation could start and stop on the other man's terms. There was no awkwardness, no need to soften edges. Authority did not need warmth. The father shifted his arm slightly, reclaiming a bit of the armrest without fully taking it. He was conscious of the movement, of how much space he was allowed to occupy without drawing notice. His daughter paused her drawing and held it up. "Is this okay?" she asked. He leaned over to look. It was the plane. Not detailed, but recognizable. A long shape. Small windows, a line beneath it that might have been land or water. "It's good," he said. "What's that part?" She pointed to a small shape near the front. "That's where we are," she said, "so I don't forget." He felt something tighten in his chest. Not fear. Awareness. She was mapping herself into things now. Locating. He nodded. "That makes sense." She smiled and went back to work. The man beside him glanced at the drawing, briefly. His expression did not change. "Smart," he said, almost to himself. The word hung there, understated but deliberate. The father did not know how to respond to it. He chose not to. As the flight continued, requests were made and answered around them. A seat was adjusted. A meal preference was corrected. Each time, the father noted how differently the same actions landed depending on who initiated them. When the man spoke, responses came with immediacy. When others spoke, they came with explanation. No one was unkind. That was the point. No one needed to be. The father felt the slow build of something he could not yet name. Not resentment. Not admiration. It was closer to pressure. The sense of being near a fault line and knowing that, eventually, something would give. He checked the seatbelt sign again. Still off. Outside, the clouds thinned. Sunlight filtered through, pale and even. The cabin brightened slightly. The man beside him folded his hands and closed his eyes once more. The father looked at his daughter. She was adding small dots to her drawing now, lining them carefully along the windows of the plane, one by one. Patient. He wondered briefly what she was learning from watching him sit here, from watching how he spoke, how he waited, how he chose when to move and when to stay still. The thought stayed with him longer than he wanted. Somewhere ahead of them, a decision was already forming. He didn't know the shape of it yet. Only that being this close to power meant it would not pass by unnoticed. The cabin settled into a quieter phase. Fewer movements. Lower voices. The father rested his hands flat on his thighs and waited, unaware that waiting itself was about to be tested. The announcement came without urgency. The captain's voice was steady, practiced, as if reading from a page he'd read many times before. There would be a brief adjustment, a change in seating to balance weight. A routine request. The father listened closely. He always did. His daughter paused her drawing and looked up at him, pencil hovering. "It's fine," he said quietly. Though nothing had happened yet. A flight attendant moved down the aisle, stopping at a few rows, speaking softly. When she reached them, she leaned in slightly, her voice low but clear. "Sir," she said to the father, "we're asking a few passengers to shift seats for landing. Would you mind moving to the aisle seat across from you?" He looked at the seat she indicated. It was narrow. The armrest fixed. The man currently there was already leaning outward, taking more than his share of space. "My daughter needs the window," the father said. Not defensively. Just fact. The attendant nodded, already adjusting her script. "Of course. We'd need her to move with you." His daughter looked between them, confused but calm. The father felt the first tightening then. Not panic. Calculation. He pictured the landing. The jostle. His daughter separated from him for even a moment while people stood, shifted, blocked aisles. "I'd rather stay where we are," he said. The attendant hesitated. Just long enough for the pause to be noticed. Before she could respond, the man beside him spoke. "That won't be necessary," he said. His voice was even. "This row is fine." The attendant turned to him instinctively, her body angling away from the father. "Sir, we just need—" "I understand," the man said, "but there's no need to move them." The word "them" landed heavier than it should have. The father felt his pulse shift, not faster, sharper. "It's okay," the attendant said quickly to the man now. "We just have to follow protocol." "Then follow it elsewhere," the man replied. There was no edge to his tone. No challenge, Just direction. The father watched the exchange unfold beside him, aware that the decision was sliding out of his hands. He could let it happen. Let someone else speak for him. Let the moment pass without cost. His daughter looked up at him, waiting. "No," the father said. Both the attendant and the man turned toward him. "We're not moving," he said. "Not like this." The words surprised him with how plain they sounded. No tremor. No apology. The attendant blinked. "Sir, it's just for landing." "I know," he said. "And we're staying." The man beside him studied him now. Not annoyed. Assessing. "This is unnecessary," the man said quietly. The father met his gaze. He did not raise his voice. He did not lower it either. "My daughter stays with me," he said. "That's not negotiable." There it was, the line drawn without flourish. The aisle behind them had gone quiet. Conversations paused. Someone a few rows back leaned forward, trying not to stare while staring anyway. The attendant straightened. "Let me check with the lead," she said, already stepping away. The father felt the space around him change, not physically, socially. He had made something visible that people preferred to keep abstract. His daughter reached for his hand. He took it, firm but calm. "Are we in trouble?" she asked. "No," he said. "We're just waiting." The man beside him shifted slightly, uncrossing his legs. He looked forward now, jaw set. A minute passed. Then another. The lead attendant returned, her expression carefully neutral. "It's fine," she said. "You can remain seated." The release was immediate but incomplete. The pressure did not disappear. It settled. "Thank you," the father said. She nodded and moved on. The man beside him exhaled through his nose, a sound that might have been a laugh in another context. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Yes," the father replied. "I did." The man turned to him again, this time with a hint of something new in his eyes. Not anger. Interest edged with disapproval. "You made it harder than it needed to be," the man said. The father considered that. He thought of the aisle seat, of his daughter's small hand lost among strangers, of the ease with which things could be smoothed over if he stayed quiet. "Maybe," he said. The man nodded once, as if concluding a thought. "There are ways to handle situations like this." "I know," the father said. He did not explain further. The rest of the cabin resumed its rhythm slowly. Conversations restarted, though, at a lower volume. Someone laughed too loudly, then stopped. The father felt heat along the back of his neck. Not embarrassment. Exposure. He had not shouted. He had not accused anyone of anything. Still, he had disrupted something unspoken. He had refused the shape he was expected to take. The man beside him did not speak again. His daughter squeezed his hand once, then let go and picked up her pencil. The plane continued forward, steady and unbothered. Outside, the light had shifted, the sun now angled lower, casting long shadows across the wing. The father stared ahead, aware that the moment had already passed, and yet had not ended at all. Some choices did not announce their weight until later. This was one of them. The descent began gradually. Not enough to press anyone into their seats, just enough to register in the ears. The father swallowed once and rolled his shoulders back, easing the tension he hadn't meant to hold. No one spoke to him. Not the man beside him, not the flight attendants who passed with quiet efficiency, checking seatbacks and tray tables. Their movements around him were professional, neutral, slightly faster than before. Neutrality could carry weight when it wanted to. He helped his daughter pack away her notebook and pencil. She handed them over without comment. He slid them back into the backpack and zipped it closed, slower than necessary, giving his hands something to do. Across the aisle, a man leaned forward and whispered something to his partner. They both glanced in his direction, then away. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't friendly. It was assessment. The father kept his gaze forward. The man beside him sat still, arms folded loosely, eyes forward. He might have been resting. He might have been thinking. There was no way to tell. Whatever ease he had carried earlier had not returned. The wheels touched down smoothly. A brief jolt. Applause from somewhere near the back. The father felt the familiar relief in his chest, tempered now by something else. Landing usually meant release. This time it felt like a threshold. As the plane slowed, the seatbelt sign stayed on longer than usual. People shifted anyway, impatience creeping in. Someone stood, then sat back down when reminded. The father stayed seated. His daughter did too. She swung her feet gently, careful not to kick the seat in front of her. When the sign finally turned off, movement rushed forward. Bags opened. Aisles filled. The father waited again. He always waited. The man beside him stood immediately. He reached up, retrieved his bag, and stepped into the aisle without hesitation. A flight attendant paused nearby, holding space. "Thank you," the man said, already moving. She nodded, stepping aside. He did not look back. The father watched him disappear into the slow-moving line of bodies. The space he left behind felt larger than it should have. Colder. When it was their turn, the father stood and lifted his own bag down. The strap caught briefly on the overhead latch. He adjusted it and freed it without asking for help. As they stepped into the aisle, the lead attendant approached him. Her expression was polite but careful. "Sir," she said quietly, "there's been a note added to your booking. Please see the desk before your connection." "What kind of note?" he asked. "Just a routine follow-up," she said. "They'll explain." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. He nodded once. "Okay." His daughter looked up at him. "Are we late now?" "Maybe," he said. "We'll see." They moved forward with the line. The jet bridge felt longer than usual. Narrower. The father felt the pressure of people behind him, urging without words. At the gate, an agent glanced at his boarding pass and frowned slightly. "You'll need to check with customer service," she said. "Your connection has been reassigned." "To what?" he asked. She typed something, then looked up. "Tomorrow morning." "That can't be right," he said. "We're on time." She shrugged, not unkindly. "That's what the system shows." He stood there for a moment, absorbing the impact. A hotel he hadn't budgeted for. A meeting he'd have to reschedule. A neighbor who would need another message. "Is there anything sooner?" he asked. She scanned the screen again. "Not unless something opens up." He nodded and stepped aside so the next person could approach. They found 2 empty seats near the window. The father set the backpack down and sat, elbows on his knees. His daughter climbed onto the chair beside him and leaned against his arm. "This wasn't supposed to happen," she said. "No," he agreed. He pulled out his phone and typed a message with his thumb, short and direct. He didn't explain. He rarely did anymore. Her reply came back almost immediately. "Understood. We'll talk when you get back." He locked the phone and slipped it into his pocket. Around them, people hurried past, annoyed or relieved or already somewhere else in their heads. The airport hummed with motion that did not include them. His daughter rested her head against his shoulder. "Did you do something wrong?" she asked. He shook his head slowly. "No." "Then why does it feel like we did?" she asked. He didn't answer. He watched a maintenance cart roll by, its tires squeaking slightly as it turned. The cost of the moment on the plane had not arrived all at once. It had arrived quietly, wrapped in procedure and policy and small inconveniences that added up to something heavier. He felt it settle. He stood and gathered their things. "Let's find the desk," he said. They walked together toward customer service, their pace unhurried but firm. The line was long. He took a place at the end without complaint. He did not look around for the man from the plane. He did not expect to see him. Some consequences didn't need witnesses. The line moved slowly, too slowly to pretend it was efficient, too steadily to justify frustration. The father shifted his weight from one foot to the other, feeling the dull ache settle into his lower back. He kept one hand on the backpack strap, the other resting lightly on his daughter's shoulder. She leaned into him without asking. The screen above the desk flashed instructions that no one seemed to read. The same questions were asked again and again. The same answers were given in slightly different tones. When it was their turn, the agent was young and tired. Her smile was real but thin. "I'm sorry," she said after a few keystrokes. "There's a note on the reservation. I can't override it." "What kind of note?" the father asked again. She hesitated. "It just says, 'Review required.'" "Review by who?" She glanced at the screen, then back at him. "I don't have that information." He nodded. Okay. She offered a voucher. Not enough to cover a hotel. Not nothing either. He took it and thanked her. There was no point in pushing. He knew where pressure worked and where it didn't. They stepped away from the desk and found a quiet corner near a closed cafe. Chairs were stacked upside down on tables, their legs pointing toward the ceiling. The father sat and set the backpack between his feet. He rubbed his face with both hands, pressing his palms into his eyes for a moment longer than necessary. When he looked up, his daughter was watching him closely. "You look tired," she said. "I am," he admitted. She nodded, accepting that as a fact, not a problem to solve. They sat in silence for a minute. Then another. The airport noise filled the space without intruding. "Dad," she said. "Yes." "When that man talked for us," she said, choosing her words carefully, "you didn't let him." He waited. "You could have," she continued. "He was helping." "I know." She swung her feet gently, heels brushing the chair legs. "But you still said no," she said. "Yes." She thought about that for a moment, her brow furrowing slightly. "I liked that," she said. The sentence was small, almost casual, but it landed with weight. He did not respond right away. He felt something loosen in his chest, something he hadn't realized he'd been holding in place. "Why?" he asked. She shrugged. "Because you were there." He looked at her then. Really looked. Her face was open, unguarded. She wasn't praising him. She wasn't asking for reassurance. She was stating an observation. He nodded once. "Okay." That was all. The moment did not expand. It did not turn into a lesson. It simply settled between them, solid and quiet. He stood and adjusted the strap of the backpack. "Let's get something to eat," he said. They walked to a small convenience stand that was still open, its shelves half empty. He bought a sandwich and a juice, counting bills before handing them over. They sat at a small table near the window. Outside, the sky had darkened. Planes moved in the distance, their lights blinking steadily. His daughter ate half her sandwich and pushed the rest toward him. "You can have it," she said. "I'm okay." "You didn't eat yet," she said. He paused, then took it. "Thank you." She smiled, satisfied. As they ate, he felt the weight of the day shift slightly. Not disappear, just redistribute. The question of whether he had done the right thing no longer pressed in the same way. It wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't about standing up to someone with more power. It was about being present when it mattered. He finished the sandwich and wiped his hands on a napkin. "We're going to stay somewhere else tonight," he said. "Then we'll fly again in the morning." "Okay," she said. No fear. No complaint. She leaned back in her chair and looked out the window. The father followed her gaze. The reflection of the terminal lights shimmered against the glass. Something in him had shifted. Not dramatically. Not permanently. Just enough to change how the day would be remembered. The cost remained. The inconvenience, the delay, the note on the booking that would not disappear easily. But alongside it was something else now. Something quieter and harder to dismiss. He gathered their things and stood. They walked toward the exit together, their steps in sync without trying. The father did not know what the next morning would bring. He did not know how long the consequences of the flight would last. He only knew that, for the first time that day, the silence around him felt earned. The hotel shuttle arrived late and smelled faintly of cleaning solution and old fabric. The father chose a seat near the front, setting the backpack at his feet. His daughter climbed in beside him and pressed her forehead to the window again, watching the airport slide away. Neither of them spoke. At the hotel, the desk clerk asked for a card and an ID. The father handed both over without comment. The room was small but clean. 2 beds, a desk bolted to the wall, a television mounted too high. He let his daughter choose which bed. She picked the one closer to the window. He sat on the edge of the other and took off his shoes, lining them up carefully beneath the bed. Habit, not preference. Later, after she brushed her teeth and climbed under the covers, his phone vibrated. A number he didn't recognize. He stared at it for a moment before answering. "Hello, Mr. Hale," a man said. The voice was smooth, practiced. This is customer relations. We wanted to follow up regarding your flight today. Yes, the father said. There was a report filed, the man continued, a concern about compliance during a safety adjustment. The father waited. We understand situations can be stressful, the man said, and we're not assigning fault, but we'd like to resolve this cleanly. What does that mean? The father asked. There was a pause. Brief. Measured. It means, the man said, that we can clear the note on your reservation and restore your original itinerary. Future travel would be unaffected. And in return? The father asked. Just an acknowledgement, the man said, that the interaction could have been handled differently. The father looked across the room at his daughter. She was already asleep, curled on her side, one hand tucked under her chin. Her shoes were lined up beneath her bed, the same way his were beneath his. What kind of acknowledgement? He asked. A verbal confirmation, the man said. For our records. The father imagined it clearly. A sentence. A tone. The ease with which it would smooth things over. He imagined the meeting he wouldn't miss. The money he wouldn't spend. The neighbor who wouldn't be inconvenienced again. He also imagined the plane. The aisle. His daughter's hand in his. No, he said. The word came out evenly, without anger. There was another pause. Longer this time. I want to be clear, the man said. Declining means the note stays. I understand, the father said. All right, the man replied. The warmth in his voice thinned. Then that's where we'll leave it. The call ended. The father sat there for a moment, phone still in his hand. He did not feel relief. He did not feel pride. He felt the cost settle fully now. The next morning came early. They checked out before sunrise. At the airport, the line at security moved slowly. A supervisor checked his boarding pass twice, frowning slightly before waving him through. Nothing dramatic happened. That was the point. They reached the gate with time to spare. His daughter sat beside him, swinging her legs. Are we okay? She asked. Yes, he said. She nodded and went back to watching the planes. When they boarded, the father noticed a small change in himself. He did not rush to make himself smaller. He did not claim extra space either. He simply sat where he was told, as he was. The flight lifted. The city fell away again. Somewhere behind them, an easier path had closed. Something had been lost that would not be recovered. The father watched the clouds pass and accepted that loss without naming it. The second flight was quieter. Or maybe he was. The cabin filled without incident. No one lingered near their row. No one asked them to move. The father placed the backpack under the seat and rested his hands on his knees, palms down, grounding himself in the familiar posture. His daughter took the window again. She did not press her forehead to the glass this time. She sat back, feet tucked beneath her, watching the wing as if she already knew what it would do. The plane lifted smoothly. The city below broke into smaller shapes, then lost its edges altogether. The father did not think about the man from the first flight, not deliberately. There was no anger left to feed that memory, and no curiosity either. The encounter had already completed its work. When the seatbelt sign turned off, his daughter leaned slightly toward him. Dad, she said, keeping her voice low, you didn't say sorry. No, he said. She waited. You could have, she added. You could have, she added. Yes. She considered that, but you didn't. No. She nodded once, satisfied, and turned back to the window. The rest of the flight passed in small, ordinary pieces. A drink cart, a shared packet of cookies, the quiet rustle of pages as someone nearby read a newspaper. The father noticed that he was no longer tracking every movement around him. He did not tense when someone stood too quickly or leaned too far back. He did not rehearse explanations in his head. When they landed, the exit unfolded without delay. No notes, no side conversations, no quiet instructions to see a desk. They walked through the terminal together, their pace unhurried. The father adjusted his grip on the backpack strap, feeling its weight settle evenly across his shoulder. Outside, the air was cooler, sharper. He breathed it in fully. At the curb, they waited for a ride share. His daughter stood close, not clinging, just present. You were there, she said again, as if returning to the thought from earlier. Yes, he replied. She smiled, small and certain. The car arrived. They got in. As it pulled away, the airport receded into the background noise of the city. The father rested his head briefly against the seat and closed his eyes. Not from exhaustion alone, but from completion. Something had ended on that first flight. Something quiet, but real. When he opened his eyes, his daughter was watching the road ahead. The world had not bent. Power had not shifted hands. Nothing about the system had softened. But the father sat differently now, straighter, without effort. Not larger, just more exact. They drove on, carrying what remained and leaving behind what no longer fit.